everybody. Welcome to the Nerds After Dark podcast. My name's Cole Swanson. I'm one of your hosts. Along with me are my brothers, two in blood, one in law, Ben Swanson, Trent Swanson, and Josh Sterling. We appreciate you coming on and listening. If you found us, and especially for this episode, you probably realized that we are reacting to the new Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power TV series by Amazon. Specifically, this episode is going to be reacting to the episodes 1 and 2 premiere. We're going to try to fit it into one episode on this podcast. So this is presuming that you have seen the episode. Ideally, this would be released before the next episode is released, but it's probably not going to work out as far as our time frame goes because we all have lives and children and things like that, so we do our best. But presumably for us, we have only seen the premiere. We haven't seen the following episodes. This will contain spoilers. We're going to give short synopses of the storylines. It'll definitely contain spoilers to this episode and may even contain spoilers to future episodes. We don't know what's going to happen, but we have a pretty good familiarity with Tolkien lore. So we might make some predictions that, who knows, could turn out to be accurate. So just that's my spoiler warning for the episode. Otherwise, we are not Tolkien experts. I would say that we are amateur Tolkien fans, but we've loved Lord of the Rings, many of us, for a long time. Some of us are newer. So we're just going to give our reaction to the episode in general. So we don't really love introductions, but you'll get the hang of who is who based on our voices and who we're talking to. So I want to start with this. I didn't tell the guys, but I want to start with one word: love or hate. If I know my brothers, I know that they like to walk the fence on things, and they like to say, well, you know, I kind of liked it, but I kind of didn't like this. So I want them to say love or hate, one word, no more, and then we'll get into our overall impressions of things. So, Josh, Sterling, love or hate, one word.
It's hard for me to go.
It's more than one word.
I have to go with love.
Thank you. Ben, love or hate, one word.
Love.
Thank you. Okay. I gave them one word and they used the inflection of their voice to, they figured it out, but it's okay. We'll get Trent's in a minute. He's incapacitated. So I'm just going to go ahead and say love. And before I get into everybody's overall impressions of the show and the premiere, I did want to say that there has been a lot of negative reviews that I have seen. I don't know why it's bugging me so much. My wife is asking me why it's bugging me so much, but I just can't believe the amount of negative reviews I'm seeing of it, and it's just driving me crazy. So
you do seem to be taking it oddly personally.
I'm taking it very personally, and so I have just a short message for I don't know, maybe not the haters, maybe these are Tolkien purists who are just like bogging it down with negative reviews. But I just want to say, take a deep breath and think of the children. I'll explain that in a minute. But, you know, we know that the show is not going to be adapted perfectly from the appendices of the Silmarillion. It's not going to be exactly what Tolkien wanted.
Oh, man.
But if you're anything like me, have you not wanted for years additional Lord of the Rings content? A decade after the Peter Jackson films, original ones, we got The Hobbit. Say what you want about it. We got it. Now, a decade later, we're getting the Amazon Lord of the Rings series. So
more content, but at what cost?
That's exactly. So that's what I want to point out. Listen. So many people, including my brother Ben here, would probably say, if it isn't perfect, then we shouldn't have the content at all. But I have...
No, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, well, that's a generalization, and I'm okay with that. But I have a couple things to say to that. So there's two comparisons I want to make before we get into everything. One is the Wheel of Time series. Okay, I've read a lot of the books, love the Wheel of Time book series. Amazon adapted it into a TV show. I'm generally very optimistic about these things, and I try to stay optimistic about the quality of the show. I was pretty disappointed in the Wheel of Time series. Was I entertained still? Yes. Even the ratings post-premiere of Wheel of Time were like twice as good as what I'm seeing for the Rings of Power, which is insane. It doesn't make any sense at all. Am I still extremely happy that they adapted the Wheel of Time? Yes, because I love to see fantasy series that I hold dear adapted into some other form of media. Two, and what I think is a stronger argument, is Star Wars. love Star Wars. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Ben's rolling his eyes. I don't know why. But listen, if the argument is that if it isn't done perfectly, don't do it at all, we would have never gotten the prequel movies in the early 2000s, okay? The prequel movies in the early 2000s for Star Wars were the first movies that I watched as a kid, and that was my introduction to Star Wars. If it wasn't for those movies, then I never would have been a Star Wars fan and gone back and watched the old movies. Long story short, if we don't allow for more content for Lord of the Rings, my 1-year-old son in 10 years, he's not going to want to go back and watch an old Lord of the Rings movie from 2003, which is, even no matter how many awards it got, is now 30 years old. He's going to look at it and say, the CGI wasn't great or the costumes look goofy. But he might watch a TV series from 5 or 6 years ago, become in love with the universe from that, read the books, go back and watch the movies and appreciate them, as I did for the original Star Wars movies. And then we now have a lifelong fan of Lord of the Rings because of recent content that might not have been perfect. So that is to say, if we don't at least encourage or not discourage additional content from being made, who knows the damage that we're doing to future generations? So I say, think of the children. That is.
I was going to see if I could find a soapbox that I could hold up on screen to try to prompt you to get off yours.
Yeah,
heck off yours. I was so long.
I was going to save it for the end, but I figured we would not have time, so I figured I should preempt everybody and just give my soapbox there. But we're giving overall impressions in this segment. I loved it. So I thought the cinematography was great. It felt like a movie. I will stop talking now. Josh.
I'm going to attach a little asterisk quickly. We know that the appendices are from the Lord of the Rings. They're not the appendices of the Silmarillion. So,
okay.
How familiar are we truly with Tolkien lore? You'll find out.
Yes. No. Like I said,
marginal.
We are amateurs. We make mistakes. We're just giving our impressions. Okay. Moving on. Josh.
We're more casual watchers. We're less hardcore lore fans.
It's true. Josh, give me your overall impressions. And what did you think of the cinematography as a man who dabbles with cameras in a professional way?
First of all, I will say my first Star Wars that I ever watched was episode 1 and 2. And that was what got me into it when I was probably 10 years old. So I see your point, but I think that it's a little extreme.
A little dramatic.
A little dramatic. That's the better word for it.
I'll take that.
I thought the cinematography was really, really good. I really liked how they had as you were going to different parts of the world, it was like showing where it was on the map and stuff. And I mean, the cities were just beautiful and the landscapes were amazing. I will say some of it felt a little bit copy and paste from like the Lord of the Ring movies. Some of the traveling shots at the beginning and stuff with the drones and like that just felt like, okay, are they just trying to kind of take what worked from that and put it in this, which you can't necessarily blame them for that. It was really cool. But overall, I'd give it like an A+ for cinematography and just making it feel very real.
I wonder how much Tolkien may have pioneered maps as a major part of his fiction, because every fantasy novel after that, I mean, they all feature a map at the beginning. Maybe that was a common part of novelizations in the 1800s, early 1900s. I haven't seen that, but it's certainly interesting that to understand any of his, or noteworthy, I should say, to understand any of his books, Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings, you have to refer to the map frequently. And so I guess that's why they have made it such a big part of the show. But, so many things he did really seemed to set the tone for all the fantasy to follow, and I think that was one of them.
So since you're talking, I'll move to you. So what are your overall impressions? And on that note, you mentioned our knowledge of the lore. How well do you feel like it's stuck with Tolkien's writings?
My overall impression is that I think it's faithful enough to the spirit of Tolkien's work. I think as I've grown older, I have been able and willing to accept that there are going to be small differences from text to screen, and that's all right. I've been able to appreciate it for the entertainment value that it offers. The overall tone of it I thought was fine. Like there was some dialogue in some scenes that I thought were a little bit cheesy. But overall, I like the characters. I like the scenery. The cinematography was good. It didn't look amateur the way that some of the stuff that I think Amazon has done has looked a little bit amateur as far as the cinematography. So I appreciated that, and I wouldn't say that I was let down. I think I got better than I was expecting.
Which the expectations were high for a $1 billion budget. But I mean, I thought the cinematography looked like a movie. I appreciate what Josh said, that it felt like some copy paste from the original movies in the 2000s, which, you know, when it's funny because the Hobbits deviated from that and then everybody like bashed them for it. And then, you know, now they kind of moved back to that, and people have mixed reviews. But Trent, give me your overall thoughts. And let me ask you this. Did you feel like the show would be objectively compelling to someone who was not a fan of Lord of the Rings?
I mean, I think overall the show is probably more appealing to people who are maybe not hardcore Lord of the Rings fans. I think more casual viewers may enjoy it for its cinematography, for its looks. Honestly, I think it looks like they tried maybe a little hard. It looks like it airs a little more on the Hobbit side in terms of kind of not gritty, down to earth looks. Made everything pretty shiny. I think mostly it looks good, but like some of the elven parts, it's kind of like that. I like what they did with the Dwarven City. But I think casual fans can enjoy it. I think there's definitely kind of this mix of hardcore Lord of the Rings fans not really liking it, and then there's kind of this middle ground, and then maybe there's this point to where I don't really care about Lord of the Rings at all, and they would maybe have a little trouble enjoying it. But I think if you just watch the movies, haven't really read all the books and stuff, you can definitely enjoy it pretty well.
That's a good point. I definitely thought it had less hobbity-ness than I anticipated. I mean, the CGI was obviously there, but I didn't feel like it was overly CGI'd. I feel like they had some good props that looked very realistic. Yeah, I'm obviously going to be
there's a couple things like, did you really need to spend all the money on it? Like that little intro with all the sand, kind of making all those shapes and stuff. It's like that looks pretty expensive.
But you know, Bezos said he wanted his Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones has the epic opening. I don't know that this opening matched that. I kind of liked that they didn't do it in the first episode. The opening came in the second episode. I don't know why.
I like that too.
I like that though. That was well done, I thought.
I'm a big fan of like openings. I will never skip an intro. Like it's what gets me like hyped up for the show. My wife always wants to skip and just go straight to it, and she makes fun of me that I like to sit there and watch the same intro every time. But I think having a cool opening is really, I'm glad they did that. And to your point of $1 billion budget, it's supposed to be 100 to 150 million per season, and it could exceed 1 billion. And if that would be the case, then it would make it the most expensive television series ever made.
So did you get hyped up by the opening?
Like from this episode 1 or episode 2?
2.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the best I've ever seen, but I thought it was interesting.
It didn't.
I don't know. It was
Let's see.
interesting. It was interesting, but it didn't get me hyped.
Yeah, I'll see how it hits on episode 3.
Yeah, I'll see how it hits on episode 3. That being said, we haven't mentioned the score, the soundtrack. The soundtrack is great. I don't think they emphasize it enough though. Like in Peter Jackson's movies, the score is emphasized so heavily. It feels like it's kind of, maybe it's my speaker setup, I don't know, but it feels like it's very much just very background. But if you listen to just the soundtrack like by itself, it's really well done. And it was, I can't remember his name, but it was partially the guy who did the initial scores, and then Howard Shore, and then teamed up with a guy who did scores for like The Walking Dead and stuff like that. So it's really good.
Yeah, it was good.
But for the sake of time, we will move on. That was our overall general impressions. Next, we're going to move on to talking about the Galadriel and Elrond storyline. We're going to hit that pretty hard, and we'll come back in about a minute or so.
So Galadriel's the central character. Makes sense. I mean, she doesn't, if you read the Silmarillion, she doesn't take a hugely prominent role, but she's one of few people that can trace that lived through all the ages, first, second, and third, and made her way into the more recent media, the Lord of the Rings adaptations. And so to be able to bring some continuity and to bring a recognizable face as the primary protagonist, I think that made some sense. They definitely have to flesh out some of her personality, because not a whole lot's given in the text, and so, but I like what they did with it. So it opens on her, and it's kind of it really, from the beginning, the first scene when she's a child, which is in the first age, before the elves have ever left Middle Earth to go to Valinor, and then they come back. It starts there, and then it quickly jumps into the War of Wrath of the elves against Morgoth after he has destroyed the two trees of light in Valinor, and he's taken the Silmarils, and they've been able to defeat him. And then it bridges over to the Second Age, which is where the show will be set, and her brother has died, and she is trying to finally destroy evil forever, and we're worrying that Sauron's making a comeback. So it starts with her traveling up into the north, searching for Sauron, trying to snuff out evil, finding evidence that he may still exist, and then having her little cadre of elves abandon her and give up on it as a fool's errand. And so she comes back with them, runs into Elrond, who apparently is facing some discrimination from the other elven lords for being half elven, which they don't really give any background to that. They just mention that he is not welcome amongst the council. Which is
Oh,
kinda
I didn't catch
interesting.
on to that at all. That's because he was half
Yeah.
elven.
Yeah, he's sitting there doing his little poetry thing, and they mention that he's not welcome at the council. I assume it's because he's half elven.
That's interesting. I just thought he was not as noble, which I was wondering about that later on, because I was like, he sure seems as noble, but I thought he was just of lesser nobility. But interesting. Okay, I didn't know that.
And I could be wrong about that. That was my impression based off whatever the dialogue was at the time, which I heard a couple of times, and that's what I was assuming. I mean, this whole kind of like the men kind of having a fear and distrust of the elves, and the dwarves having a distrust of the elves, kind of this whole racial disharmony thing that we see playing out. I think that's what was coming through, in that what they were implying about Elrond was the half elven thing.
Okay.
So, but they don't give his backstory, which is fascinating, because he's half elven and half man and part god too.
Well, we
anyway,
might get it later. I bet we
but
will.
so anyway, they come together, Galadriel and Elrond, and he tries to dissuade her from continuing on this zealous pursuit of Sauron, and he tries to tell her it's all okay, and she should let it go. And then Gil-galad, or Gil-galad, depending on how you like to pronounce it, offers to send her and the rest of the elven lords that traveled north over the sea to Valinor to live in peace among the land of the gods. And then she inexplicably jumps out of the boat and decides to swim back across the sundering seas. Meanwhile, Elrond meets with Celebrimbor at the behest of Gil-galad to help build a great tower and forge to craft what we can only assume is going to be the Elven Rings of Power. And to do that, he has to recruit the help of the dwarves. So he goes to Khazad-dûm, Moria, to touch base with his friend. Is it Balin? Was it Balin?
Isn't it Durin?
Durin. Yeah, sorry,
Durin.
Durin. And it looks like he's probably gonna be able to get the help of the dwarves, who maybe have already created their own rings of power. Is that what was in the box? We don't know.
Yes, that's interesting.
Wait, which box? I don't remember the box.
The box that opens at the end when Durin and his father.
Oh yeah, no, I do remember that. I do remember thinking that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they open the big shiny box at the end.
And then what ended up happening to Galadriel at the end?
Yeah, so she on her hundreds of mile swim, I don't know how far that is, she gets picked up by the refugees of, I guess, an attack by Sauron's orcs, and then the worm, the sea monster, comes, and she ends up with the guy. Don't know who he is. What was his name? Haldir?
Something like that. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if. Yeah, I don't remember his name. I don't know if they were refugees of Sauron's orcs. Their original ship was attacked by the worm.
But why were they on the
Right.
ship? They were from the Southlands, so yeah.
Okay.
I guess we don't know why they are on the ship.
Yeah. So anyway, and then it looks at like at the end that the Numenorians probably are coming to pick her up.
Yeah.
I assume that's who's standing on the deck of the ship that comes by to get her. So we're going to be introduced to Elrohir's descendants,
hmm
I think.
I think we're gonna meet. So this is a spoiler, but I saw on the cast list. I think we're gonna meet Isildur.
Is he alive?
I
Durin.
swear I saw that he's on the cast member list.
I mean, I know the Numenorians lived for a long time, but I don't think they lived that long, right? I mean,
No, the Numenorians are the descendants of Elros. Elrohir was Elrond's son. See, we don't know the lore.
Well, then tell us about the lore, Ben.
So the lore, oh man, but it goes back so far. The lore is that Elrond's grandfather, an elf, marries Melian, a Maya. Oh man, I hope I'm not messing this up. But marries Melian, a Maya, and then and they beget Luthien, the most beautiful of all the elves to ever live, and then she marries Beren. And then what happens?
This is from memory. You have a family tree memorized.
This is very impressive.
And then where does it go from there? I'm gonna have to look back. But anyway, as it turns out, Elrond is descended from an elf and a man, and so he's half elven, along with his brother Elros. And they're descended from Beren and Luthien, who are the main kind of romantic couple throughout the Tolkien lore, and are supposed to reflect Tolkien and his wife. He's Beren, she's Luthien. It's on a gravestone, and so kind of down the line, some important things happen in that line. But down the line comes Elrond and his brother Elros. They are half, and the Valar kind of leave it up to them. The Valar are the gods. Kind of leave it up to them to decide if they want to be elf and be immortal and kind of deal with kind of slow decaying of the world around them as they linger in their immortality, or to live the life of men and to accept the gift of Iluvatar, which is death, and to go into the great beyond, wherein who knows what happens after that. So so Elros chooses to be a man, and the Valar give to him long life and wisdom, his whole line, and so they become the Numenorians. And Elrond elects to be an elf, and so he descends down that pathway, and Arwen is his daughter, and Elros's descendant is Aragorn. So they are like 2,000 years removed cousins.
Incestual. Oh man.
I don't know if you consider that incest.
Okay. Well,
A lot of generations between.
I mean, well, for her it's close. I mean, for her it's like, she's the next, but Aragorn's slow. A lot of bloodlines.
yeah.
So, as someone who has no idea about a lot of this stuff, you're telling me that the Numenorians get their long life because they're half, like their ancestor was half elf.
Yeah, that's right.
And they were
And
gifted
somewhere-
that by the gods, Valinor.
Right. It was
Okay.
they long story, but somewhere in there there's some, you get the picture through the show that there are some humans that fight for Morgoth. But the faithful men that fight for the side of the light, they're somehow involved too. Like the Numenorian gift from the Valar is also that they're somehow the men that fought for the light. It's been a few years since I read the Silmarillion, so I don't really remember perfectly, but that's part of the deal too.
Can you also describe, you in your beginning summary, you talked about Morgoth and having the Silmarils. Can you describe what the Silmarils are? I think Celebrimbor kind of gives a little description.
They barely mention
Yeah.
it. They barely mention it, which is actually a big critique that I read, was that when they talk about Ben might touch on this, I'm sure, but when they talk about the great battle and Morgoth destroying the trees and the elves leaving Valinor, is that what it's called?
Valinor.
Leaving and going to Middle Earth to fight, they made it sound like it was all because of Morgoth attacking, but really that was because of the Silmarils being stolen and a fight, a war being created because of that. I read that was a critique that they omitted it, but you could also make the argument that it was all told through Galadriel's point of view, and her point of view might be more related to she's fighting because Morgoth evil, not so much that they're fighting over the Cimmerals. But yeah, sorry, Ben. Tell us about the Cimmerals.
So I mean, she was definitely there for the whole Cimmeral arc, but so there are several iterations of lights in Middle Earth. So at first, Arda, the world, is kind of formless, and it's just sea and fire, and the Valar, who are the angels or the gods, they come down and they form it all into firmament, and they make it into land and sea and everything that we know. Morgoth kind of tears it up as they're trying to build it, but anyway, they kind of drive him off, and they put together Aule, the kind of god of craftsmanship. He crafts two big lamps that he puts up on pillars, and um, and Varda, I think, who is one of the chief goddesses, the goddess of light, essentially. She fills the lamps with light, and then Morgoth comes and he tears down the pillars and he destroys the lamps. And so then the next iteration of light is in the land of Valinor. The elves go out to the west. They join the Valar out there. I think Yavanna, one of the goddesses of kind of nature and plants, she brings into being these two trees, and one tree has leaves of gold and one leaves of silver, and they give off this wonderful radiant light, and they call them the trees of the Valar, or the two trees of Valinor. The golden tree was Laurelin, and the silver tree was Telperion, and so one of the kind of lines of elves, the Noldor, were craftsmen, kind of in the way of Aule, and the chief craftsman among them was Fëanor. Fëanor? Wish I knew. And so he kind of surpasses everyone in strength and in skill. And so he creates these gems from like containing the essence or the light of the two trees of Valinor. And they were just exceedingly beautiful. And you look into them and you just see just the wonder of the lights, this kind of ethereal luminescence. And they were widely coveted, especially after Morgoth infiltrated Valinor with Ungoliant, who is from whom was descended Shelob. So Ungoliant was a great spider. So Morgoth and Ungoliant go and they destroy the trees. And so after that, the light, the only remaining light from those two trees, which were the remnant of this wonderful time in Valinor, they only reside in the Silmarils. Morgoth takes them because he coveted them. He takes them to Middle Earth, and Fëanor essentially declares war on him and takes the Noldor back across to Middle Earth by way of an ice bridge in the north, including Galadriel, by the way. And they go to destroy Morgoth and to set up their own kingdoms in Middle Earth. By the way, some of the other elves that were the shipmakers refused to give them passage across the sea, so the Noldor fought them and killed them. It's called the kinslaying, and it's like Cain and Abel. Like, it's the first violence between elves, and it was devastating. Galadriel didn't participate, but those were her people that perpetrated that first kind of outrage.
Interesting.
Did you just read off all this? Like, what?
I hope that that's all correct, because that is a little bit from memory, but it's been 2 years since I read the book.
Okay, so now we have the history lesson, which is helpful. These are things that I didn't know or don't remember. I've only dabbled in the Silmarillion. So, did you have any specific thoughts or questions about the story arc and the storyline for those two for the show?
Me?
Yeah, for us.
Well, I do have a statement real quick. I think you kind of glossed over it a little bit, how you just said her brother died. I think for her character arc, it's important to know that Sauron killed her brother, and he also had a mission to go and find and kill Sauron, who was the disciple of Morgoth. And so Sauron kills him, so it's now basically her personal vendetta to go after Sauron. I think that kind of really drives her character and kind of brings this kind of rebellion that we see in the show.
It does drive her. I read that that's, it's not exactly, they don't describe how Finrod, her brother, died, exactly how it happened. I think he was kidnapped, um, and eventually was killed. I can't remember if it was Morgoth or Sauron. So that was another critique. Those are the small things that I just don't mind. They have to cram like the whole Second Age into this palatable TV show. So I understand that there's going to be some changes. But yes, that does drive her, for sure. I know that, so like the first 20 minutes for me were like, boom, awesome. It was kind of reminiscent of the Fellowship of the Ring and the, I don't know, the kind of sequence of events where they describe the making of the creation of the One Ring and then the Elrond and Isildur battling Sauron at the end and that sort of thing. Kind of was reminiscent of that, which I very much enjoyed. And then we kind of got to the first battle, which was after that, which was Galadriel and the Ice Troll, which I know that there has been some controversy, as they say. So Ben, what was your concern with that being realistic?
What, the fight against the troll?
Yes.
I mostly had a problem with her leaping off the sword. The sword that doesn't bend, even though it's 4.5 feet long, and she just leaps off of it and he casually lifts her up. And I don't know. To me, that's not how swords work. But
It's true.
I understand Legolas walked on top of a snowbank when they were trying to cross the Caradhras or whatever in Lord of the Rings. So they are light of foot. So maybe you could explain it away with that. But it just, there are kind of these cartoonish parts of some of the Lord of the Rings movies, like the barrels down the river and the Hobbit and some of the stuff in the Battle of the Five Armies that you're like, nah. Or do we have to defy the laws of physics to tell a good story?
We know that is...
Legolas went, we know the elephant and down the shield on the stairs and the arrows and the stuff. But I don't know. I could do without.
We know.
Yeah, I mean, I would rather have a gritty sword fight, but it's definitely, as you said, it's not unprecedented with him riding the Oliphant, shooting the head, and then riding down the shield of the stairs.
Right.
Obviously, those were kind of memed over in the old movies. Like, people didn't particularly like it then either. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely like some more.
Recall that what was Tolkien doing? At least in my view, he was creating a mythology for England, for Europe. And so the idea, theoretically, is that this world predates our own. So it abides by the same laws of gravity and such. And, material sciences. And so it takes me out of the story for some of that stuff to happen.
Material silences, but then what does Elven see?
We have wizards.
Material silences. There's a lot to go against that.
I mean, there's wizards and
my only point is, if you're gonna criticize that, you have to equally criticize Peter Jackson's movies too, because they have those aspects. We all know that The Hobbit was loaded with it. Okay, we get that. But it's a show meant for children. Let's just all remember that.
This is not a show. This is not a show meant for children. I mean, should be geared towards adults who have grown up with the Lord of the Rings, who've read the books.
Yeah, I felt like it was pretty intense. I definitely think it was at least teenage age or above.
I'm not even saying if it was or was. I'm just saying it should be geared towards adults more.
Right. It was. I mean, it's a step above Star Wars in that sense. But, you're going to get 12-year-olds watching this show. 11 to 12-year-olds. I promise you will.
Oh, yeah. I mean, my 6-year-old nephew is watching it. So.
Well, there you go. Okay. So, any thoughts on... So, Ben obviously referenced the long swim, which we don't actually know how long it was. I want to point out that while that was a bit unrealistic, there was... thinking it's still unclear that to enter Valinor or to enter the Undying Lands, you kind of had to effectively die. So like you saw them kind of dissolve, that was probably just like for effect. But she might have very well thought that she was not going to be able to come back from that. And so this was her only chance to swim was to swim. And then she had the drive that Trent mentioned to hunt down Sauron. Appropriately, I might add. She's correct, and then there's obviously we find out that Elrond is actually doing something sinister thinking that it's in her best interest, and Gil-galad is doing something kind of backhanded by sending her off, and that they know that Sauron's there. But yeah, obviously it's not realistic that somebody could swim a very long way in the ocean like that.
You didn't have to die to go. Like I think we had talked about off camera. I'm pretty sure at this point, Valinor it's a geographical place. It's like sailing from Europe to America, and they could just come to it. Now, I mean, people aren't really going back from it after they come to it. I don't recall if that wasn't allowed or whatever, but I do know that some of the Noldor, like Galadriel, even after being allowed to come back, they're forgiven for the kinslaying, essentially. They're allowed to come back after Morgoth is defeated. Some of them, they had fought for Middle-earth, and they wanted to stay, and that was her. But yeah, the whole like going into the light like death, I don't really know what that was about.
All right. Well, okay. Josh, what were your thoughts?
But I guess that was the easiest way to describe it without the long backstory. So
Exactly. They have to condense it. Josh, what were your thoughts on the dwarves? We referenced obviously Khazad Dûm, but what were your thoughts on the dwarves?
So just so I understand correctly, this is Khazad Dûm. Is that it?
Yes.
That is in the original movies where they go, and that's where Gandalf dies.
The
or you think he
Mines of
dies.
Moria.
Well, he dies, but
Okay.
you shall not pass. That is the bridge of Khazad Dûm.
Okay.
Well, he doesn't die in it. He dies on top of the mountain, to be fair.
Yeah, right.
And then in the Hobbit movies, that's a separate mountain, right? Or is that the same one?
Different mountain.
Different mountain.
Right.
Yeah, where they
So,
the goblins, yeah, different.
hmm
Also, where where the dragon is.
no, like where the dragon is. That's what I meant. Because that was like,
that's
but
along
I
the
guess-
mountain. Yeah, it's north and to the east of
okay.
of Khazad Dûm.
Smog.
So
sorry.
my point is that in both situations, you're going into what was of the past. Like you don't get to see it in its full glory. It's just talked of way back. This was incredible, and we had so many tunnels and mines and all of these precious jewels, and it's like this. It's been passed down through generations, and they care about it so much, but you don't get to really see the glory of it, in real time. But this, you got to see it, and so I thought that was pretty cool. Seeing, they're at work, they're, you see their full operation, and obviously they're very, very proud of it. But I mean, I thought it was interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand the game that they made him play at first, but I guess that's some kind of formality they have, or like in their culture of what they do. But
It was
Did
an
anyone
invention
else-
for the show. Yeah,
Did anyone else think it was
Okay.
going to be a drinking game the whole time until they brought out the
that's what I was kind of thinking. Yeah,
I thought it was
Yeah.
like parlay in Pirates of the Caribbean. Like I didn't know what was going to happen. But no, I love the Mines of Moria, and we did get a glimpse of the door to Moria that we see in the Fellowship.
the friend.
Speak friend and enter. Almost kind of, they kind of made some references to it with the rift between Durin and Elrond with their friendship. It's like, maybe it makes sense that he would make it the elven word for friend was how to get in there. It's kind of, I like it.
well, in truth, I think an elf crafted the door.
Well, I'm sure Durin, I'm sure he had to say in what was the passcode. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you think that was the same door? I wasn't as sure.
There one
I
article,
wasn't sure,
I wasn't
but-
sure either. It looked different, but one article did say it was. So I don't know.
I mean, there was that pond in front. Yeah, there was the pond. But yeah.
It might not have been, but I like to think.
All right, so get this. So in truth, Celebrimbor helped to build the door.
Oh, interesting.
They were in Lord of the Rings. So I don't know if the door that is there is to be replaced, or if Celebrimbor has already built the door. In which case,
Which
you
wouldn't
would
make sense.
think
It doesn't seem like he
he
has
would
any
act
relationship.
a little more familiar with it. Yeah.
Right, yeah. So it's either they aren't referencing that in the show, or you're right, he goes on to build something. But there's a much more that we could get into with this storyline, because this is the media storyline. We'd spend a lot of time on lore, which I think is fine. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and talk about Arondir and Bronwyn briefly, and then also the Harfoots before we get to the end. So we'll take a brief break.
All right. So we're moving into the story with Arondir and Bronwyn. Arondir is an elf who is stationed over in the Southlands, specifically the village of Tirharad. He is part of basically an elven guard who are there to keep the peace in the Southlands. The Southlands are a home for humans who were basically allies to Morgoth during the last war. So basically the elves don't trust them. They're kind of still watching over them, making sure there's no evil going on, no rebellion. So they've kept guard over them over several hundred years, it seems like. So Arondir is one of those guards who comes in and checks on the humans and all that. It seems like the humans are pretty standoffish of the elves. They don't really trust them. They don't really want to have this guard or have these people over them, which is understandable. And it seems like Arondir has built a relationship with a female human named Bronwyn. She's a healer of the town. And so you kind of see the secret relationship going on. It seems like Arondir doesn't want the elves to know, and Bronwyn doesn't want the humans to know. And so eventually, after Galadriel is sent to Valinor, Gilgalad sends a message saying that the war's over. We no longer need to guard these humans. Let's just leave them. However, Arondir doesn't want to leave because of his relationship, so he leaves his guard, but while the other elves are leaving to go say goodbye. And during this time, this old man brings this cow who seems to have some disease. The cow milks out oil, basically, this dark sludge stuff. And so Arondir goes to investigate with Bronwyn to this town. During this time, we find out that Bronwyn has a son. His name is Theo. And the son happens to have, it seems like, this Morgul blade that has the sign or symbol of Sauron on it. And we kind of see the symbol before with Galadriel. She finds the symbol in one of Sauron's old fortresses. And also on the symbol's also on her dead brother after he was killed, had the symbol of Sauron on it. And so we find that he has a sword somehow. And we'll get to that a little later. So Arondir and Bronwyn, they go check out this town where the cow was supposedly at, and this town has been destroyed. There's no human bodies or anything. Arondir, the elf, finds this tunnel that seems to be maybe dug up or this tunneling under the town. So he goes to check it out while Bronwyn goes back to town. She finds out that her son is hiding and her house is all messed up. There happens to be an orc. What is implied, it seems like the orc is attracted to the blade that the son may have had. That's what it could be. So the orc attacks the son. They end up being able to kill the orc. And then Arondir warns the townspeople, shows them the head of the orc, and they all leave the town. Bronwyn. Bronwyn warns the townspeople, and they all leave town. Whereas Arondir, we find that he gets snatched up by, looks like, some orcs. We don't really see what it is that snatches up, and we don't know what happens to him by the end of the episode. So, yeah.
That's pretty creepy. I was waiting for, I don't know. I was waiting for a worm, truthfully. I thought it was going to be some sort of worm animal that was down there. But, yeah. Anyways, go ahead, Trent.
I like how they made the orcs. They look pretty practical, and they look pretty intimidating as well. I like what they did with the orcs. Also, with Theo and the blade, we noticed that he spills some of his blood on it, and the blade. So the blade at this point is it's just got a hilt, and then a little of the blade's left. But he spills some blood, and the blade starts basically growing or reforming.
I wouldn't say he spilt the blood. It looked like the blade was sucking the blood out of him.
That's a good point. Yeah, it did appear that way.
And that other kid got pricked.
Yes.
Oh, did he? By what?
I do remember. By the blade.
He touched the blade, and it will be interesting to see what exactly is the story of the blade. Not a Morgul blade, because Morgul doesn't exist at this point.
Okay.
But it is reminiscent of the Morgul blades from the Third Age.
Well, what is distinct, Trent, about the Southlands that we come to know?
So apparently the Southlands is where Mordor will eventually be. It's the same area.
It's very interesting. I was kind of thrown off by this whole humans aligning with Morgoth thing, and that there would be, I don't know. I was like, what? That doesn't.
I mean, you had the Easterlings who aligned with Sauron. But...
True, those were humans. That's a good point. So yeah, there's a sentiment towards darkness, it seems, in that part of the world for whatever reason.
Well, if you kind of analyze, was it Theo? Is that the son?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever that blade starts growing, it didn't scare him. Mm-hmm. You could sense it was this, he was embracing it, he really liked it, you know. even though it may not. It was evil, you know.
I mean, it seems like there's still a sentiment for Morgoth or Sauron within the town among the people. Like they hate the elves so much that there seems to still be that sentiment.
Yeah, it's hard to say if that's more just because of their animosity towards the elves versus. I mean, when it was brought up, there seemed to be a clear like that was a long time ago. Like people aren't like that anymore. But that was mainly from Bronwyn. I guess the other kind of sketchy people might feel differently. I think that's gonna be an interesting storyline. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next topic? All right.
I do like the idea of the elven outpost. That was kind of a cool thing.
That was fun. Though it felt like the most CGI portion to me was when he was up there looking over the landscape. It felt pretty CGI. Though
I didn't notice.
I didn't notice either.
It's good. That's good. Maybe it was just me. But I loved that the orc was not CGI.
Yeah, the orc looked good.
It's way better. It's just so much better that way. The Hobbit, all the orcs were CGI. What were they thinking?
I don't know. Ben, I don't know if you have any insight into this, but I was reading an article saying that that within the elven hierarchy, they wouldn't send out make these outposts where he's kind of controlling them. He's telling all the elves what to do. It seems like the elves are more independent rather than this hierarchy that's shown in the show.
I have nothing to add there.
Okay. Didn't know if there's any
I'm not really familiar with that dynamic.
That is interesting. All right, Josh. We'll instead of a break, why don't you tell us about the Harfoots?
Last but definitely not least, I guess
Definitely
least in
smallest.
stature,
Yeah.
we have Nori and the Harfoots. So these folks, these small people, are basically the ancestors of the hobbits in the Lord of the Rings books and movies. And they don't really have a home. They are wanderers of Middle Earth. So you kind of get the sense that they're hardworking people. They all have their role and their job in the community, and they're all working together to survive and protect each other from potential threats or giants, which are really just the humans. So, so yeah, you get introduced to Nori. She's kind of the main character, and she is, I guess, a teenager or a younger girl in the community. And you quickly find out that she is not the typical Harfoot. She wants to push the boundaries. She's very curious. She's very adventurous. The first scene is her leading a bunch of the other children out to an old farm to pick some berries where they're not really supposed to go anymore. And then you also see that there is some kind of wolf creature kind of circling and watching them. And they have to kind of quickly get out of there. So that's kind of alludes to that maybe her curiosity is not going to be good. It could get them into trouble, could potentially cause harm to some of the folks. But in the same sense, you kind of get the feel of like Frodo and Bilbo, and like that desire to want to be what no one else is, and like go out and see the world. And you kind of get that same feeling from her, and that obviously those two characters played an immense role in bringing about victory for good in Middle Earth. So you kind of think that maybe she may have the same role in this age. So that leads us to the most interesting part, or one of the most interesting parts of the two episodes, at least in my opinion, and it is when Ben, what did you call it? The Meteor Man?
That's what I've seen it referred to in a couple articles, yeah.
Yeah, so like all of a sudden there's this giant meteor. It is flying across all the different parts of Middle Earth, and it crashes conveniently right next to where the Harfoots are currently settled. And of course, Nori is the one that kind of stumbles upon it, and you come to find out that it's not just a rock, but it's a man who has come and crashed into Middle Earth, and he's sitting in a ring of fire. And so she goes in to investigate. Of course, instead of being scared, she's curious and ends up falling into the fire with the man. She finds out that the fire doesn't actually hurt her. It's not it doesn't burn her. And so then she starts to try to develop a relationship with him and try to communicate. He obviously can't speak the same language as her, and so they're having some trouble. And he seems very disoriented. He doesn't really know like where he is, maybe, and or how to, you know, I don't know. He just seems very lost and trying to figure out what he's doing. And so yeah, I guess we can leave it there. What are y'all? Were there any big takeaways from y'all on just the Harrowfoots in general before we get to the mystery meteor man?
Only that it was confusing to me, like, why do they call it Harfoots instead of Hobbits? Because that's what everybody's familiar with. From what I can tell, Hobbit is I might be getting this totally wrong, but from what I read, a Hobbit is an umbrella term for 3 types of halflings. I can't remember the other 2, but Harfoots are who, like, Frodo and Sam descend from, are a Harfoot. Does anybody else come across something like that?
I mean, is there a lore in Harfoots, or is this completely made up?
There's a little bit. I mean, it's kind of 3 lineages of hobbits, almost like families, and they maybe are a little bit different. The other 2 are fallow hides and stores.
Yeah,
I trust you that Frodo and Sam are Harfoots. I'm not.
that's what I
I
read.
don't know that for myself.
That's
Okay.
what I read.
But yeah, they were known to have probably been in that area around the time. They aren't really written about in the Silmarillion, or at least not in the Second Age. So this isn't anti-canon. It's just some imagination.
I think I remember there was a reference to maybe the family that Nori was a part of. Do y'all remember that?
Mm-mm.
We have to look into that.
Because that would be interesting because from what I remember, it might have been one of the common names that we know
Like
from.
Brandy.
Yeah, or
Buck.
Took.
Yeah, well, yeah,
or-
they said Brandyfoot. Yeah, Brandyfoot, which is
Yeah.
kind of like Brandy Buck,
Mm-hmm.
Meriadoc. I don't think they were Harfoots. I think the Brandy Bucks were descended from one of the others.
Okay.
But I'm pulling that right out of my butt.
I think that what's distinct about them is
Stores. They were mostly Storish with a fallowhide strain, according to the one wiki to rule them all.
very
So
specific. They're nomadic versus like the hobbits that we're familiar with that are like European countryside type of, in their holes type of thing. But I just
In the
wanna,
Shire.
in the Shire. I just want to say that I think the man is Gandalf. That's my vote.
Yeah, I
so
mean,
let's get into that. What do we think? Who is this man? What are the theories?
So Sauron
Chad.
is a very popular theory. Gandalf is a very popular theory. Sauron, I can see. I mean, it seems like he was using some kind of dark magic. I mean, the Fireflies died after he used the Fireflies, which is a little strange. You wouldn't think that would come from Gandalf. It also seems strange that the Valinor send Gandalf that way, because he lived in Valinor. I mean, the Valar. He lived in Valinor before, right? He was living in Valinor.
yeah, he's a Maya, which is a lesser angel, and
Yeah.
his name was Olorin. But yeah, they sent him in the beginning of the Third Age, so later than is portrayed in the show, if it's him, to aid mankind and elvenkind in the fight against Sauron.
It looks like some opinions think that that the show's doing where they sent Gandalf a little early for just a little bit, then he went back to Valinor, and then they sent him back at the beginning of the Third Age.
And that would be anti-canon, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But whatever. I think talking to the flies, one of y'all pointed out, is a good indicator. But Trent's right. The flies dying, strange.
They're probably trying to leave a little bit of doubt. But I at least from my impression when reading about the Silmarillion and Anatar, which is the name that Sauron takes for himself, like I just don't suspect he's gonna look like a wildling hairy man. I think he's gonna be a little bit more slick, a little bit more attractive. And I think he's already been at work because Celebrimbor obviously has it in his mind to make the Rings of Power, and the dwarves as well. And so the Meteor Man arriving after all that's been done, and Anatar presumably has already been at work, doesn't really make sense. So I suspect it's going to be Gandalf.
Well, was he supposed to be disguised as an elf, Sauron?
I think so, essentially.
Yeah.
And, Gandalf had a special relationship with the Hobbit, so it would make sense that this would be the explanation for why, is that Nori comes upon him. And then, him talking to the insects and all the same way he talked to the moth on the top of Isengard. It seems too strong of an illusion. I think maybe the fireflies dying is just a little bit of a red herring to keep the suspense up.
I think if it is Gandalf, I think that is a wrong move on their part. I think it should just be maybe a wizard that we haven't met yet. I think using
they all
Gandalf
come at once. They all come at once.
Well, yeah, but they can even use their own wizard. I don't think they have to use one that we know so well that could maybe hurt our memory of him.
I mean, they did that for Elrond and Galadriel, though we don't have nearly as much information from,
I mean, you can't really do it after Ian McKellen did Gandalf,
They want their show to be successful, and Gandalf's a fan favorite. So, people said the same thing about Dumbledore, and they portrayed young Dumbledore with, what's his name? And I think that may be probably what they try to do. I mean, it could be one of the other Istari, one of the wizards, like the brown wizard. It wouldn't be one of the blues because they're kind of together, and I don't think it would be Saruman. So I suspect.
What about Radagast?
Right. It could be Radagast. It could be Gandalf. I doubt they would use Radagast.
Yeah, no. Is there any Radagast room for other
Yeah, I'm just saying their own complete new wizard.
Yeah,
I don't think there's room for it because the wizards. I mean, there weren't like a race of wizards. They took 5 Maya, lesser angels, and they sent them to Middle Earth in human form at one time for a specific purpose, and those became the only 5 wizards that we know of
ever were. Yeah, it's different than other magical fantasy realms for sure.
Right.
Very interesting. I am intrigued to find out, and there's so many more things that we could talk about, but for the sake of time, we're going to have to call it there. Very quickly, we're all going to get one sentence of a final thought because we don't have time for full final thoughts, and then I want a ranking. Since I did love-hate earlier, I'll give you some wiggle room. A ranking 1 to 10 of what you thought of the premiere. Josh, you go first. One sentence, ranking 1 to 10.
Galadriel was my favorite character, hands down. I thought the actor did an amazing job. And I'm very excited for her story. I think that the 4 different plot lines, kind of all separate, but then eventually probably going to converge, is very intriguing. Although it is a bit much to follow all at once, unless you listen to a podcast like ours where we break it all down for you. But yeah, I was overall very happy with it, and I'm excited to see what happens. And I would rank it maybe like a 7 out of 10.
All right, 7 out of 10. Trent, that was more than one sentence, but you only get one sentence. Rank 1 to 10.
I would just say I know a lot of people who are hating on the show before even watching it, so I would say just watch it, give it a chance. It is a decently well-made show. I would probably give it a 6.8 out of 10.
Oh, all right, Ben.
That's 4 sentences. I'm going to go 7.2. I was skeptical, but I enjoyed it.
All right, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10.
We are going to get killed in the comments, by the way.
Yeah.
This
why?
is.
Wait, who's going to comment? Who's commenting?
No one's going to comment. This is a naked reaction. We obviously have done no research. And I who knows how many things we got wrong? Who knows?
Yeah.
We're going to find out.
This is all on you. You're the one who's talking about all the lore.
Yeah.
One guy's going to watch it, and he's going to email the heck. We aren't even accepting emails.
We don't have emails. No.
Yeah.
Who's got their emails on here?
I've listened to too much stuff you should know.
Okay, we tried to keep it high level. Ben got into the weeds, which is where we get in trouble. But that's okay. Hopefully you learned something. And even if he's wrong, it means that you looked it up and figured it out for yourself. I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. I thought it was great. My one sentence.
9 out of 10.
Listen, Trent. My one sentence is just give it a chance. Don't be so harsh. We want the content to keep coming.
No, we don't necessarily want the comment to keep coming.
Any cost.
Over the course of decades, it needs to come, Trent. Think of the children. Think of the children. All right. Thank you all for listening and sticking with us. For those who did till the end, we will see you next time after the, third episode, but the second iteration of the release of the Rings of Power TV series on Amazon. Check us out on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and we will see you next time. Thank you.
Peace.